What up, my crush? It's me, Fresh. Now, as of this point in time, I'm officially 25 years old. And you know what that means. Your childhood is officially dead.
Do you have a cookie for...
Now, some of you might see that as a bad thing, but in some ways, it's needed in life. Because it's important to move on to new things when you've outgrown others. But there is one thing that none of us will ever be able to outgrow. Fear. No matter who you are, we've all been caught off guard and scared witless by multiple nasty shocks as children. Whether it be from film, television, or video games, the world will always come up with something to successfully traumatize you. So now that the first quarter of my life is over, I thought it was appropriate to talk about the top 15 scariest moments from my childhood. Yes, you heard that right. Top 15. I was a wuss as a child. But a kind wuss. So grab your childhood plushies and a door to hide behind. This is my top 15 scariest childhood moments.
Number 15. Jumanji. Just the whole freaking movie. This movie had no right to be as unnerving as it was, and yet somehow this movie gave me nightmares for years. The story revolves around a pair of kids who discover this magical jungle-themed board game called, you guessed it, Jumanji.
But this game is magical in all the wrong ways.
Because every roll of the dice summons something deadly from the jungle into their reality. And everything summoned is out to make sure you never make it to the end.
Some of these scary threats include
a flock of huge bats hiding in the chimney, giant mosquitoes that can send you into a fatal seizure, a creepy and vicious gang of monkeys, a killer stampede that can happen anywhere, giant carnivorous plants that can poison and devour you, a hunter who's out to kill people, a dangerous monsoon that floods the house that summons a pair of crocodiles.
How is this kid-friendly?
But for me, two of the scariest scenes are the lion in the attic. Dear God, just look at that puppet. The other scene was when Alan accidentally rolled his first turn and gets... I'll just watch.
In the jungle, you must wait until the dice read 5 or 8.
Holy crap!
As you've already noticed, there's a lot of practical effects and dated CGI in this movie. These effects add to the otherworldly feel of these threats. In some ways, they're just normal animals, but the realistic puppets and tacky CGI adds to the creepiness. They don't look all there, they don't look all real, and that's what makes them so frightening. It also doesn't help that the game summons kids to it by sounding a mysterious drum beat, which just so happens to be what you're hearing now. This was so scary that I grew a fear of these drums, as if I heard them in my house, it meant Jumanji was somewhere in the house, and I was screwed.
And I know what you're thinking. If this thing scared you so much, why is it at number 15? Because it's one of my favorite movies now.
Despite me being terrified, I kept coming back to it again and again, until eventually I grew immune to the scares and just enjoyed it for what it was. The story is great, the actors are amazing. Sure, the CGI is a little dated, but this was 1995. This was a year before Toy Story, so the effects awards were well deserved at the time. Jumanji. Next time you hear spooky drum beats, may God have mercy on your souls. Number 14. This next one is weird, because I don't think it even exists anymore. For context, I loved Art Attack as a kid. I mean, I loved it. So much so that I would frequently look online for their infamous websites. But one day, however, I found something online that really unsettled me. And because I have no footage or images of this site, I'll do my best to describe it. On one website, I found an Art Attack game. A 3D Art Attack game. But little did I know, this would have nothing to do with the show. Just because something has the same name doesn't automatically mean it's the same thing. This game acted like the old Doom games. It was a 3D first-person shooter game, taking place in an art gallery that just so happens to be infested with creepy 3D robot enemies.
Because AI couldn't make its own art back then, apparently.
This game was unsettling. A seemingly endless labyrinth of really long, dark hallways lined with paintings on the walls. On top of that, there were the robotic enemies you had to avoid at all costs. These things looked like the sort of robots I battled nowadays. For a time, I was alone, until I got shot from long distance by one of these robots, which instantly killed me. The worst part about it was the death screen. I could see the robot who killed me slowly walking towards me from that distance. By this point, I hadn't had a good look at them. The closer it got, the more scared I became, until I quickly closed the tab down, never opening it again. This game has seemingly been lost to the ages.
I don't even have a picture of him. Only in my memory.
I really wish it wasn't there at all, but if it doesn't exist anymore, then that's good enough for me.
The Art Attack shooter game. Proof that sharing a name means nothing. Number 13. Donovan choosing poorly in The Last Crusade.
I accidentally walked in on my dad watching this when I was really young, and boy do I regret it.
Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. Another grand adventure about Indiana Jones questing to find the Holy Grail before the Nazis do. Up until now, the movie has been action-packed adventure and puzzles. Until the grand finale, when we find the chamber where the Holy Grail is housed. Inside, we find an immortal knight, the last survivor from when the Grail was secured. The room is filled with many goblets and cups. Indy and the villains are told that in order to find the real Holy Grail, they must take a drink of holy water with the goblet of their choosing. The main villain Donovan has his assistant choose the most beautiful and decorated cup of them all, only to take a drink and discovers...
It's a trap! What is happening to me?
And that's why I never properly watched the rest of this movie until I was 12.
Just look at this! The fake grails take away your life as punishment. As a result, he ages so fast to the point he becomes a skeleton and crumbles to dust. The stilted effects add to the scares yet again. It's a great effect and all, and it's a fitting way to kill off this sort of villain, but it's too good to a little kid. But now that I've grown up, I've learned to accept this scene, and re-watching it, it is followed by one of the greatest symbolic lines the franchise has ever delivered.
He chose poorly.
You get it? Because if you become a Nazi, you're immediately going to hell. But until then, as a result of this, I never truly watched the Indiana Jones movies until much later in life. And it's a good thing I did, because as it turns out, all indie movies have creepy moments in them. The Last Crusade. Not my best introduction to this franchise.
You must choose. But choose wisely.
Number 12. The opening to Captain Scarlet. Made by Jerry and Sylvia Anderson, the same minds behind Thunderbirds and Stingray, Captain Scarlet was a marionette puppet show about an indestructible man who fights a mysterious alien threat called the Mysterons.
I couldn't even make it past the opening.
Now, Kadikarus sums up my thoughts on this opening perfectly, so I suggest you listen to his video for my thoughts on it. The opening to the show was haunting. It opens with an unseen person walking down a dark alleyway at night, all while we're told what we're dealing with by the opening narrator. This was a sensory overload to me as a kid, and I didn't want to see anymore. This was my dad's program, not mine. The opening to Captain Scarlet. Spectrum is brown. For crapping my pants! Number 11. The build-up to Snow White's poisoning. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Disney's first fully animated feature. And even now, over 80 years later, it can still creep you out. Up until this point, the movie has been a classic fairy tale come to life. Yeah, sure, some might get scared at Snow White's journey through the scary forest, or when the evil queen turned into a hag, but none of them really stressed me out. But the one thing that did was in the third act. In this scene, Snow White is hiding out in the dwarf's house, when her evil stepmother in disguise approaches the house and offers her the poisoned apple. She tells her it's magic and will grant her wishes if she takes a bite.
Now I want to bring something up. I knew what to expect. I knew that Snow White was going to get poisoned. It's just... the build-up is just so unnerving.
This build-up made this scene harder for me to watch, because I had no idea how this would be portrayed. And what's worse is that I knew Snow White was doomed. It also doesn't help that she's backing Snow White against the wall with no chance of escape. So I hid myself under the blanket, and even that didn't help me.
Don't let the wish grow cold.
Oh, I feel strange. Oh.
Even though you don't see her suffering until the last shot, I could hear her growing weaker, the queen describing her ailments, and finally Snow White collapsing to the floor. To which I was unfortunate enough to witness as soon as I poked my head out.
That's like knowing Bambi's mother's gonna die before you see the movie, and you'll have no idea what happens until it's too late.
Sure, the dwarfs arrive and chase the queen away and Snow White is revived at the end, but until that point, this movie was in a really dark place. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, proving you can still be scary over 80 years later.